Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Caternolo, and I'm the library marketing assistant at HarperCollins. And today I am with Chloé Caldwell, the author of Women.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening.
And I'm going to tell you a bit about Chloe before we jump into the questions. Chloé Caldwell is the author of The Red Zone, the essay collection I'll Tell You in Person, Legs Get Led Astray, and the forthcoming Trying. Chloe's essays have appeared in the New York Times, Bon Appetit, New York Magazine's The Cut, BuzzFeed, Long Reads, Vice, Nylon, and many more, as well as a half a dozen anthologies, including Goodbye to All That, Writers on Loving and Leaving New York City, and Without a Net, The Female Experience of Growing Up in Working Class, and Sluts. Her essay, Hungry Ghost, was listed as a notable in 2018 Best American Non-Required Reading. She lives in Hudson, New York. So, Chloe, thanks for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this book. It has been my favorite read of the last few months, like my obsession. I've been talking about it to everyone.
Thank you, Grace. It is so fun to be here too. It's been great to see you at some of the events in New York City, and I'm excited to talk to you as well. I think this is the first podcast I'm doing for the new edition of Women, so that's sort of a cool, exciting thing.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm so honored. So why don't you tell our listeners, mainly librarians, about women? What do you think they should know?
What should they know? Well, it's a book that came out on a micro press. I think we can call it a micro press because it was just one person running the press. That was called Short Flight Long Drive, and that was out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I wrote the book really quickly. I wrote the book in about 6 months with like a deep sense of urgency. And I sold it to Short Flight Long Drive a few months later. So it was really, for a book, it was a very quick turnaround. I've written other books and I do know the process of books. And I do know that from conceptualizing a book to selling the book to publishing the book is usually many years. So I think Women is really different in that way. It's also a very slim, short book. It is a novella, and novellas are usually around 20,000 words. So that's what it was originally, though the new edition is it's a little longer because we added more scenes. And back in the day, Women didn't even really look like a book because it didn't have a genre and it didn't have a subtitle. It didn't have a synopsis even on the back. It didn't have
Mhm.
a bio on the back. It had nothing. So it became this sort of strange little if you know, you know book. And I think where it's placed in libraries is interesting too. Like I've seen Women even in bookstores placed in different genres. So sometimes it's placed in poetry, sometimes fiction, sometimes memoir, which I think is really interesting to pay attention to because it's like an enigma of a book.
I think that says a lot about who's sorting it too, whether they interpret it as poetry or a memoir. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's
Um,
fluid. It's genre fluid.
yeah, I love that. If you had to give a synopsis of the book, what would you tell people?
Hmm. It is a book written from a place of deep confusion and heartbreak and isolation. And it's written with a sense of urgency, like I said before. I was a young writer. My first book came out when I was 26, and Women came out when I was 28. Therefore, I was capturing things in real time. And Women would have been a completely different book if I had written it even 2 years later, 1 year later, 3 years later. But I wrote it after I based it on an experience that had happened in real life. That's what I drew from is those feelings. And I think that gives the book such a sense of realness and chaos. I mean, that's the only way I can begin to understand why so many people did end up relating to it. And I think the irony of it is that I wrote it thinking no one would relate to it and I was all alone. And then the opposite ensued. So that's the perspective is it's written from this like chaotic, unknowing, uncertain, heartbreak and feelings of doom and feeling like you're going to die from having a broken heart, really. And other things too. There's some people don't talk about this much, but there's like a sense of class in the book as well. Like this narrator had no money, and was scrapping together jobs and income. So that also adds to the sense of chaos and this instability throughout. And the book is fragmented. So it's some pages just have short paragraphs on them. And plot wise, this woman who is mid-20s, I suppose, meets an older woman. They're 19 years apart, and the older woman is very settled in her life and domesticated and wears her identity as a badge. She is gay and open about being gay, and she is in a decade-long relationship. And the two women meet and connect through writing, and just it's like one of those, you've seen these love stories in these movies where people, they feel familiar to each other and you don't know why. So the narrator and the older woman, whose name is Finn in the book, they have a strong attraction and connection, and they become friends. And they're sort of like they're unlikely friends, and they become very close. And the narrator thinks, since she's in her mid-20s, because when you're in your mid-20s, you do think that you have it all figured out and that you know who you are, because you're not a teenager anymore and you're not 21 anymore. And I don't say that in a condescending way. It's just something, it's just how it works. So she is like, okay, I'm straight, and grew up more in like a bubble and in a small town. And now has moved across the country and is in a town that's just exposing her to so many other kinds of people and ways of life. And so they begin emailing a lot. And this is one of the like the things of the book that makes it a relic, is they are constantly emailing. There were no iPhones, and one night they hook up, they have sex, and from there chaos ensues. And yeah, the word situationship was not a word at the time. Unfortunately, that could have been the title of the book. Delusionship didn't exist, but all of those really do describe the book in a lot of ways. So they fall in love, they continue to see each other. Polyamory was not part of the lexicon in the way it is now, so that wasn't part of the plot at all. This was an affair. So they begin having an affair, and obviously it can't work out to anyone's benefit, and they basically run it into the ground, and they take on again, off again to like the next level, and it becomes somewhat toxic and torrid, but also really bittersweet. And they really do care about each other and love each other. And I think what is interesting about the book, I never had the narrator come out. Like there's no ending where the narrator says, okay, well now my identity has changed and maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm gay. It just is life. Like it's just an experience. And by the end, everyone feels sort of broken and exhausted and tired, but also changed. So I think what I've learned is a lot of people have had in their way, shape, or form relationships like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, relationships that are so intense, they're not going to survive are kind of like captivating, especially as readers and people who experience those things. And before we dive into questions about the book, you said that you got into writing when you were really young, your first book published at 26. How did you start writing, and what made you think like this is what I want to do?
Mm-hmm. I was a horrible student. I hated school. I loved socializing, but I hated school. I loved like the parties in the woods and like beer pong. I got horrible grades. I didn't believe in it. It was not the way that my brain learned, was not in these environments. I went to a public school. All of my teachers sucked. So I had a pretty bad experience in like middle school, high school, just was not my thing, but I loved reading. So, but so you would think I like excelled in English. I also like failed English pretty much. Not always actually. That's not true. I think I could always like write an essay. This is the irony, right? Like I could always write an essay.
Give yourself more
So
credit.
yeah. Um, so English I did okay, but everything else I totally failed. But I was always reading and I was always journaling. So I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of journals. So writing was a real constant thing that I did. I was making lists, I was analyzing everything. I was doing it all, like in my bedroom, smoking weed, writing my journal. That was life. And I did not know one writer. I did not know a writer was the thing you could be. This is the 90s, early 2000s. Didn't know a writer. No one said to me, I didn't have, sometimes you hear these stories and they're like, well, someone pulled me aside and was like, you should think about being a writer. You're great. And no, I did not have those experiences at all. I had all the teachers being like, you need to stay after school. You're failing. You're not going to get into college. And they were right. I didn't get into college, nor did I want to go to college because, again, I didn't like the environment. And I knew if I went to college, it would be a waste for me and for my parents if they paid for it. So I did graduate high school by the, thin of my teeth. And then I moved to New York City. And in New York City, I found Gotham Writers Workshop, and it was dirt cheap to take classes. They used to have those yellow bins like that look like newspapers, and they were always yellow if they were Gotham. And then you would take the flyer, and the flyer would have all these classes, and the classes were like 10 weeks for $300 for 3-hour classes each week. That's a really good deal. So I began taking classes that way. And I took a memoir class, I took a creative writing class, and then after memoir, you do memoir 1, memoir 2, memoir 3. And I worked with some great teachers, and Melissa Febos taught there at the time, and she offered mentorships. So I did a mentorship with Melissa Febos. I would bring my essays and go to her apartment in Bushwick, and she would give me feedback. And over time, that ended up being my first book, Legs Get Led Astray. So yeah, I just continue. I loved writing. I loved it. I still love it. I hear everybody out there like complaining about writing. It's so hard and they hate it. Like I love it. I think it's so fun. I think it's such a privilege to be able to sit and like make stuff up or write about an experience you had. Like what a privilege. I think it's like the most fun thing ever. Of course it's hard and of course it has its moments, but for me, it was like the only thing I felt like I could do. It was like my one skill. Yeah.
I think like that passion and love really comes out in women. And I think that's why it became this cult hit. And I know we have a beautiful blurb on the front by Emily Ratajkowski, and Lena Dunham's tweeted about it. You've seen celebrities lounging on Instagram with holding women. Can you talk about how it felt to have this like blow up, even though it was a kind of if you know thing? Talk about how it felt to have it blow up, but also how does it feel to be like sitting in this moment in time where it's being reissued?
Mm. Yeah, I think Women was a slow burn, but a consistent burn. So it wasn't like overnight something happened, but it consistently happened. The overnight thing was definitely in 2014 when I gave a galley of the book to Ashley Ford, the writer Ashley Ford, and Ashley Ford gave it to Lena Dunham, and Lena Dunham posted it on Instagram. Now, that wouldn't be as big of a deal now if Lena Dunham posted a book on Instagram. At the time, she hadn't posted any. Like you have to remember, this is when celebrities there weren't influencers, there weren't ads on Instagram, there wasn't shopping. And it was like, as someone else said to me, it was the time when celebrities were like wanting us normal people to know like that they read. So they're like, look, I read a book, right? And that happened to be my book. The 2014 thing with Lena posting that, this is like the peak of girls,
Oh
right?
yeah. Which is
This is
having a big resurgence at the same time as women. I'm not saying
yes.
that is like divine, but it feels like a little bit more than a coincidence. So
Absolutely. It does. And it makes sense that because Lena and I are the same age, we're both born 1986, and we were sort of like on that path. And everyone, yeah, there's all this nostalgia, and we're 10 years away now. So Yes. So when she posted that, it's so funny because I was at one of my broke jobs catering a wedding, serving hors d'oeuvres. And my phone at the time is when you would like keep your phone on like vibrate and like loud noises. And so my phone's like going off and I'm like, what the hell? And I look and people were texting me like, Lena Dunham just posted your book on Instagram. And she posted it with a bottle of red nail polish. And I think that
Ooh.
I think that did help spread the word. It definitely, for a small press book and for the small press world, which I was very much a part of,
Mhm.
it did that stuff like that didn't happen a lot. And then it began to because celebrities did begin using Instagram. So Lena posted that, and then the book came out. She posted before it came out, maybe a few months. And then
Mhm.
the book came out, and Lena kept, whenever Lena had an interview of like, what are you reading right now? Or what do you recommend? She would say women.
Hmm.
So that gave it, I guess, like some cred and some exposure for sure. But yeah, I mean, it was fun, it's the internet. And like, this is what I love about books is like anybody can find a book, anybody can see a book
Right.
when they're over at their friend's house on their coffee table. Books are amazing in that way. They like live this life outside of the writer and they just go like travel and, and meet
Yeah.
people. That's what feels so, so, so special about this book is that it shows like if things are resonating with people and people who love books, they will tell their friend and then their friend will tell their friend and then they'll tell their girlfriend and then they'll tell their mom and then it just keeps going like that. And that has been really cool to see.
Yeah. And I think that's the magic of women. Like I've told a lot of people about it. And prior to me reading it, I had other people telling me about it. And it's also what's wonderful about this book is that librarians are going to have it and they tell everybody about everything. It's literally their
Yes.
job. So
Love
um
librarians.
yeah, I've been talking to them about it. They know I'm excited. There's a lot of discomfort in the feelings and
Hmm.
intensity, but there's a comfort in the way, at least to me, the way I interpret it, that I felt like the narrator, almost trusted me to hear it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Which feels weird to say, but I felt like we were friends and they were sitting on my couch and we have a glass of wine and they're like, you got to hear what just happened to me.
It's
And
really intimate. It really does.
yeah.
I can see how people feel like it's not a confession, but confiding. And
Mhm.
those are different, right? Confessing versus confiding. And I think that's what's also been interesting about that book is a lot of people write to me and they're like, I felt like you wrote this for me, and that's
Yeah.
like amazing. And I have felt that way about books too. So I totally know what they mean. And maybe I did write it for them, and
Mhm.
not to be cheesy, but it is very true that a lot of writers are like, I can't find this book. It doesn't exist. I'm going to take a stab at it because I need it, especially when you're in your 20s and grieving. Um, and that's what it came out of. And I worked at a bookstore. In my 20s and I would just look and look and look because I always want the book that's like exactly like my experience. So
Oh yeah.
and I looked like where is there a relationship just like this one that doesn't end happily and is just about the heartbreak, and I couldn't find
Mhm.
the exact thing. Of course there were other beautiful books that were inspirations for women, but that's really where the catalyst to write it came from.
Yeah. And I think that also that feeling of looking for something specific to your experience makes the magic of women because that's how it gets passed along, right?
Hmm.
Like someone reads this book and they're like, hey, this reminded me of like your horrible breakup and your intense like grief. Um, and also just the relationships in the book are really interesting in a way that I was really um kind of enamored by. So the book is titled Women and not Woman. And there are so many women in the novel besides Finn that the narrator has relationships with. We have the female Woody Allen, Sabine, who I loved and was one of my favorite characters, Lily. But to me, one of the most important relationships was the narrator's relationship with her mom. And I
Hmm.
wanted to read this like short passage that's at the very end of the book.
Great.
We sit in the living room discussing gay politics and personal opinions. My mom says the word dyke numerous times. I put none of my personal experience into the conversation, but my mom and I hold eye contact a few times, like there's a secret between us. I love that passage. I like reread
Mm.
it and I chewed on it for a while. And I think it says
Mm.
a lot very simply about the mother daughter dynamic. And Can you talk about your decision to add this sort of mother-daughter relationship to the book?
Hmm. Wow. I've never spent a lot of time with that paragraph. So it's interesting
Mm,
that you pointed out, like, I never read from it when I'm doing readings. I've never had someone bring it up in an interview. But now hearing you read it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is kind of deep. That's cool. This is what I mean. Like
like, damn, who wrote that?
I probably haven't looked at that since I wrote it in 2013.
Mm,
Um, the mother character, I mean, I think now I teach writing and everyone is always writing about their mom. It's just how it is. Um, that's the Freudian,
oh
life
yeah.
that we live in. And I think that's beautiful, and my mom shows up in all of my books.
Mm,
And in women, it was great to include. I liked that I was including, I didn't do this super intentionally, but I see it now, including women of different like age diversity
mm,
and
mhm,
at different points in their life. So there's the narrator who's in their 20s, Lily and Sabine in their 20s, Finn maybe, mid to late 40s. There's the transgender character, also 40s. And then the mother who,
mhm,
let's say 60s. I don't know. So right there, we're covering a lot of decades. And I thought it was interesting too. I think it just added a lot of texture to bring in
mhm,
a mother character because the narrator is going through something so painful.
mhm.
And when you're a mom, the only thing you want is for your child to like not experience that type of pain. So I think those two things together were really interesting. Like seeing the narrator surrounded by her friends, they're going to handle her like heartbreak and
Mhm.
craziness way differently than the mom. And the mom is going to
Right.
say things that it has a different perspective because it has life perspective. So those scenes were actually really fun for me to write. Definitely based on my experience with my mom, and we actually added some new ones into the new edition. A kind of funny scene. I don't want to say it now because it's kind of cringy, but it's toward the end of the book. Um, but yes, and I have heard in a lot of feedback that the mother parts, I think maybe because in books that are so much about heartbreak and sex, we are expected as a culture to like separate that from like parental stuff, like they're not mixed. But I think it's really interesting to take two things that seem unrelated and bring them together. I think like that's what life is, and
Right.
people are people. So you're having both. You're dealing with parents and aging grandparents and like all of these things, but then also having this maybe like your first time, queer sex, and like those things are going on simultaneously and you're
Mhm.
living in that. So I think that that was really fun for me to execute.
And I think like having those characters that are in different generations like add something for the reader. Like maybe somebody reading this isn't in like, they're not in their 20s experiencing this intense heartbreak, but they might have a child who's experiencing that and they're going to take something really different from it than
Exactly.
that 20-year-old.
That's a good point because I know, people say like, oh, I give this book to someone I'm dating or my ex, but like give it to your mom, like if you're experiencing heartbreak and you want her to, and she like thinks is like, oh, get over it. Like you're like, here's what I'm feeling, and
Yeah.
then they can relate to the mom. I love what you're saying. I've gotten so many letters about women, but I haven't gotten one from a mom. This is
Yeah.
actually blowing my
Huh.
mind. So maybe with the reissue,
Somebody give
somebody's
it to their
mom, please
mom.
reach out to me.
Someone please give this to your mom.
This book is
Also,
for you.
if you're not out to your mom, you are now. um,
Exactly. It is a way to
yeah.
come out. It is a way. The Strand used to have it under like staff picks, or they had funny signs. One was like,
Mhm.
yeah, one was with women. It said the best book to give to your parents after you come out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was
That's
great. It
amazing.
was great.
How does it feel to have women like be called a staple of queer literature?
It's interesting. I don't know. It's really interesting. I mean, My friend recently said, like, does that make you feel old? It's
Oh my
like,
God.
because people are like, if
You're
it
a
says
relic
like,
now.
kind of, it's called, if it says like the back of the book or the galley says like cult classic. And my friend was like, that's a classic already? Like, it hasn't been like, it hasn't been like 500 years. Like, it's been 10.
Yeah.
But I love it. I think, I mean, I feel so, it feels so surreal and fun and incredible. I mean, I don't think people get this opportunity too often. And you never know when you write what the hell is going to happen to your books. And that's what I love about writing. I'm like a risk taker. And this is how I take risks now, is like writing books. And they can, they go out into the world and maybe they sell and maybe they don't. And maybe like 5 people write you that it changed their life, or maybe no one
Mhm.
ever writes you, but you sell a billion copies. Like everyone's journey is so different. I am just such an advocate for writing because now that I see what happened with this, because I'm like, wow, imagine if I talked myself out of writing that.
Right.
And isn't that
Yeah.
sad? You know how many of my students say to me, like, oh, I have 20 pages. I think I'm going to stop. I'm like, why are you stopping? That could be a book. Imagine if I said, I have 20 pages of this thing. I don't know what it is. It was called
Yeah.
Roller Coaster. And luckily, I had writer friends who were like, keep going.
Mhm.
So I think like you never know what something is going to turn into. And, it's like a book that really came from the heart. So to have that connect with other people's hearts and to be where I'm at now and 10 years later and able to reflect on it and seeing how my writing has changed and how my life
Mhm.
has changed. And um, I'm just like kind of grateful to the younger me for having the balls to have written it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And imagine how many people like wouldn't have had this book to be like, oh, somebody else is feeling these intense
Yeah.
things. I think like especially when you're kind of going through grief or like feeling an intense emotion, you're like, oh my God, I created this emotion. Like I'm feeling a
Yeah,
way that nobody has ever felt. And then you like
exactly.
read something and you're like, actually, I'm gonna be fine because somebody else experienced this. So I
Exactly.
I
It's
love
so
that.
important to feel seen. I think books are just so incredible in that way. And maybe someone will be 17 and find it back to the library, find it in their library and
Mhm.
like make them feel like, oh, someone else survived this. Because that's what I had wanted at the time. Like, oh, who has survived these kinds of feelings? Now that I'm older, I'm like, of course we survive them, but it doesn't,
Mhm.
it doesn't always feel that way when you're 25. And so that's my hope is like someone's like crying on the library floor and is like, what is this weird book? And then like flips it open and feels seen and comforted and like inspired to write something themselves. I think it's all just really good for people. Reading and writing is like very healthy for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think speaking of libraries, I've cried in a lot of libraries, safe places to
Me
cry.
too. Oh my God. Yeah,
Yeah. So our narrator works at the library.
that's right.
Yeah, and I love the part where she talks about like seeing what books Finn has been reading.
Oh my
I
God.
I love
Yes.
that. And I think that says so much. But can you
That's like ancient day stalking.
I know there's no Goodreads. Well, there are Goodreads and this Goodreads is a big
Yeah,
part
there
of this
was.
book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe it doesn't have the same platform as it does now, but if when you read this book, everyone listening, check out the Goodreads section. Let Chloe know where you've been blocked.
Yes.
But
Have you been blocked on Venmo, Spotify, or Goodreads? Yes.
I wanted to ask, what was the significance of having her work at a library? Was there a specific significance? Like what made you choose that job?
Yeah, I think because she was an up and coming writer,
Mhm.
and when you're an up and coming writer and you don't really know how to get a real job and you didn't go to college, you've either got like barista, hostess, waiter, server, or retail. Library is a little bit more outside the box, but it's in the
Mhm.
world of books and retail. So instead of a bookstore, it was a library. So I just really liked that as a backdrop, especially because Finn and the narrator were really connected over literature and books and um, would send each other sentences and poems and we didn't even screenshot back then. So we'd be sending pictures of the book. And so it just seemed like also a good backdrop for her to work with other types of like eccentric characters.
Mhm.
Like, who's going to be like working in a library? There's bound to be some cool people. So that's how the Nathan character came to be too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the literature references in this book. You like get hit with one like I think immediately, like in the first page, Finn's tattoo,
Yeah,
the
Virginia
Virginia
Woolf.
Woolf classic. Um, can you talk as well about your experience with libraries?
Yes. When I moved to New York City in 2006, when I was 20, and I was just telling my friend who's scared to move to Bushwick now with like $5,000. I'm like, I moved to Williamsburg with $400. And she goes, oh, then I'll be fine. And I was like, well, things cost less then. But I moved there
Yeah.
with $400. I got a waitress job. I started taking writing classes. And guess what? I used the library because I didn't have a comfortable home life when I was living with like three roommates in Greenpoint and Bushwick and Williamsburg.
Mhm.
And, people were messy and smoking cigarettes and it was disgusting. So I would go to the library. The library I used the most was the one in Greenpoint, actually,
Mm.
because that's when I was that was my writing classes era, right? And we had to print out our work and bring it to class at night. So I would go to the library in Greenpoint constantly to do my homework for writing classes. I mean, you could really say I wrote my first book, like Legs Get Led Astray at the library.
Mhm.
It was incredible. And there's a few other ones in New York City that I love that I've been to multiple times. I taught one class at the New York Public Library. That
Cool.
was really fun. It was a 1-day course. And I also remember being a kid and going to those, and you just feel like it's Christmas because you're like, I'm allowed to bring 10 books.
It's free.
Oh,
Yeah.
like the concept is just, it's incredible. And it's also really fun. I was actually just in Boston and got to see the Boston Library, which is beautiful.
Mhm.
And it's so fun. I'll type in like women, like my book, and then it'll come up like, here's what we recommend that's similar. And I'm like, that's so cool. And I learned about all of
Mm.
these other books that I had never heard of that look so good. So yeah, that's sort of my library spiel, but they're so just like comforting, cozy. We have a great one here in Hudson.
Oh yeah, it's adorable. I've been
You see
there.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
The
it's
old
very
Armory
cute.
building. Yeah,
I
because you
could
can sit on the floor. Like the difference of a bookstore and a library is at the library, you can sit on the floor and read.
Mhm.
You can't really do that in most bookstores anymore.
Yeah, they'll kick you out. They're
Yeah.
like, you, this isn't a free
Like,
place
get
to
out
sit
of
and
here,
read.
you animal. Go to the library.
Yeah, you're loitering. Yeah, there's no loitering in the library. Do you have any final thoughts for librarians or for readers? And what would you say to somebody before you send them off to read women?
Good luck. No, I would say like be careful. Don't do anything I would do. And no, I don't know. I think they should just experience it for themselves. But for the librarians, I think or if anyone listening, like go get the book from the library. That's like so romantic and
Hmm.
and like sexy to do. Like use your library, get the book. Um and yeah, I just really appreciate all they do and everything that book lovers do in any way, shape, or form. Readers, booksellers, librarians. It's just we're all like in this together and it's hard out here. So it's so refreshing to just talk to people like you who
Mm.
just love books genuinely. So yeah, I would just say thank you.
Oh, you know what? You heard it here, folks. Using the library is romantic and sexy.
It's erotic.
Well, Chloe, thank you for chatting with me today. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. I
And
loved your questions and I really appreciate you, Grace. That was a fantastic conversation.
oh, well, thank you. And to all librarians and anyone listening, you can get the reissue of Women with that beautiful Emily Ratajkowski quote on the front on June 4th, 2024. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.